Hi, and welcome back. This is Disability Saves the World with Dr. Fady Shenouda. I am Fady Shenouda. This podcast brings you insights from leading experts in disability and MAD studies from around the world. You'll hear about the research and work of disabled scholars, activists, artists, and our allies. You'll also get some insight into their lives, their favorite non-DS activities, hobbies, and adventures. Most importantly, you'll hear how they think disability can save the world. My name again is Fady Shenouda. I use he, him pronouns. I have a PhD in public health sciences. I am currently a SSHRC postdoc in London. I identify as a fat, disabled cis man of color. If you don't know me, hopefully you'll get to know me a little bit more over the course of the next few episodes. You can also check out my work on my website, fadyshenouda.com. But now to get to today's guest, I am joined by Andrew Gurza. Andrew, who uses he, him pronouns, is a disability awareness consultant and a fellow podcaster. He is the host and creative mind behind one of the most popular disability podcasts out there, Disability After Dark. Now in its third year, the pod has amassed over 100,000 downloads and has been in the top 100 sexuality podcasts consistently. I'm delighted to be speaking with Andrew about his work.
And every single one that I reached out to said no. And I was like, well, guess what? I'm queer and disabled. I want to talk to you.
His life outside of podcasting.
And he saw me, seeing him, and he walked over and he goes, you know who I am? And I was like, yeah.
And intrigued to find out how he thinks disability can save the world. Hi, Andrew. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's so wonderful to have someone who has been doing this, someone who has some practice in this. You can tell me what I'm doing right. You can tell me what I'm doing wrong.
The fact that you're putting out disability content is the rightest thing you could do. So you're on the right track.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So I want to just jump right into what I call segment 1, inside the project, the research, the work, the art. I want you to tell me how you got involved in disability activism. How did you come to learn about kind of disability studies or, different models of disability?
How I got involved with disability activism was I was bored one day, and I just said, I didn't seek out disability studies or disability activism as the thing I did. I still kind of don't. I just sort of, I was finished university. I studied law and disability at Carleton U in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada, and I was done my degrees, and I was like, I don't want to go back for a PhD. I don't want to do more academia. That's not really my thing. I want to do something creative. I want to do something fun. And so I started emailing queer and gay magazines saying, have you ever talked to a disabled guy before? And every single one that I reached out to said no. And I was like, well, guess what? I'm queer and disabled. I want to talk to you. Can we have a chat? And so that was kind of my first foray, not into disability activism per se, but putting myself out there as a public figure. And that was back in 2013, and I've just kind of been doing it for the last 7 years, kind of without really a roadmap on how to navigate disability activism, because I think a lot of the time disability activism can be very narrow in its scope, and I wanted to do something much more creative.
So why sexuality in particular? Was it the intersection of being disabled and queer that you felt wasn't represented in media or wasn't represented in the world?
The honest answer is yes, all those things came after, but initially it was, I want to get laid and I want all the hot dudes to notice me. And the one way I can do that is if I take my shirt off on a magazine cover. Maybe somebody will pay attention to me then. And so all of the stuff you're talking about came after, definitely. But initially it was, I want to have sex, I want to be sexual, I want to be objectified like everyone else I'm seeing. And this is one way that I know how to do that.
So what really drew you to the idea is kind of like a bare desire to be wanted, like
Yeah,
everybody else,
yeah,
right?
exactly.
You'll excuse the word bear here when talking about queer culture, but like that slipped in
There
accidentally.
there are so many connotations because I jokingly refer to myself as a bear in a chair, um, and then there's bear like bare naked. And so yeah,
Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff we can play with for sure.
there's layers to this.
So many layers.
So is there kind of a theoretical grounding, or not necessarily, it doesn't have to be theoretical, but do you have any sort of kind of analysis to how you approach? Are there things that you say like, no, this is not within my set of principles or set of guidelines that I have? I'm going to reject this idea. And what are those principles or what are those guidelines for you?
I think I've always kind of operated on the guidelines of I want to use my lived experience to teach people, whether they're disabled or non-disabled, about how to interact with disabled people. My mantra when I first started this was making disability accessible to everyone and trying really hard to talk to the non-disabled communities about disability and bringing them in to my experience. And I understand where the the anger within the disability community comes from around ableism.
Mm,
I totally get it. It's valid and real, and I respect that. I am trying, and I operated in that space for a couple years and doing this work, and I found that I was constantly angry at everyone all
right.
the time. And so I made a shift this past December to try to meet people where they're at and try to talk to people about disability no matter where they are, no matter if they make ableist statements, no matter if they say ableist things, no matter um, if they are ableist 100%. I'm gonna try to give them tips and tricks to confront their own ableism, to dismantle their own ableism, and um, and to talk about it so that it's something that we can not necessarily eradicate, because I think we all have the capacity to be ableist, but it's something we need to recognize and talk about. So my framework for what I do has been let's not shame anybody um for not knowing or for saying ableist things or for like calling someone out. It can be really fun sometimes and really like, yeah, I called him out, look at me, but I don't think it
Yeah.
moves things forward very well. So I'm really trying to use my platform to teach people about disability, regardless of where they're at.
Does it get exhausting? Because I think a lot of the work that you know, I think people have talked about how exhausting teaching can be from like marginalized communities, right? When there are so many ways that people can teach themselves.
Yeah.
Is there ever a moment where you're like, no, I'm not going down the teaching road. I'm gonna send someone a resource, or I'm gonna send someone to read this thing, or to look at that thing, or to listen to my podcast. Is there ever kind of a line that you're like, I'm not crossing it?
All the time. Like I get
Mm,
DMs all the time from people who want to be like, "Hey, how do we do this? What about this? Can you tell me this?" And oftentimes sometimes I just won't respond, but I try to remember that this is an opportunity for me. It's not a responsibility. It's an
right.
opportunity for me. So I don't have to, and I can walk away, pun intended, because I can't walk. But I can I can remove myself whenever I choose to. But I have a platform where I can use my voice to create change. So rather than calling someone out, rather than calling someone enabled, rather than doing like these are terms that I've seen really presently within the disability community, and I get where they come from, but I just think they create more divide than they do togetherness. And if what we're after is a harmonious world where we're all accepted, if we in the disability community start dividing who's able and who's disabled, it just gets icky, if that makes sense.
It does. No, I totally get that. And I think your distinction between opportunity and responsibility is a really good framework for activism, right? It's like this is my opportunity to teach. This is my opportunity to provide clarity. This is my opportunity to correct ignorance. But
Yeah.
it is not my responsibility to do that every single time, over and
N-
over again,
No.
without, for example, compensation or a sense of
Or
for it.
some sort
And
of recognition that I did it for you, of course.
exactly,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I mean, I do this a lot with the talks that I give. I have been approached by so many places that have said, "Can you come and speak for us? P.S. We can pay you, we can pay you nothing." And initially I'd be like, "Fuck you, pay me." But
yeah,
I'm starting to think like, okay, look, a lot of these places are just struggling to make ends meet. They want to create awareness. They have no money. So I've made a rule. I pick 5 organizations a year that I think are really worthy of my time, and if I like what they're doing, I will read. I will, if they reach out to me, or if I get an email from one of those really cool places, I will say like, you know what, I like what you're doing. Um, if you can't pay, you're one of the 5 that I'll work with, because I understand that it isn't always about the money. It's about community building, and yeah, the money helps to like feed me and all those things, and that's important. But I do have the privilege of being on social assistance, so that sounds weird. It's not always a privilege, but it is a privilege, and then I get it every month. So it's available to me. So if I can give back to my community by not always taking, resources when I don't need it, that's what I'm going to try to. That's what I'm trying to do.
yeah. And of course, besides the talks and besides the kind of work that you're doing as a consultant, one of the methodologies that you use is, of course, the podcast. So, how did that come about? What intrigued you about podcasting? Yeah, why that approach?
I started writing for Outlet when I was doing that like call out to the magazines, being like, "Hey, have you ever worked with a queer disabled person before?" And they said no. I was submitting stuff to HuffPost to write, and so I did that for a couple years for free before they paid, just to get my name out there and to start writing stuff and to start writing how I felt about things. And then I realized that typing got really hard for me physically. Typing
Right.
for a long time got really painful in my joints, and I was like, well, this is hard. And podcasting was just starting to kind of blow up, and I looked in the podcast medium world, and I realized there was nothing about disability. There was like 1 or 2 shows maybe that would do 1 or 2 episodes a year on disability, but nothing consistently about the disabled experience. And I was like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Like I can do that. And so I had no equipment like I do now. I had nothing professional at all, and I had no voice in this space. I literally grabbed my Apple Mac headphones and said, "Okay, I'm gonna do this. Let me do an episode." And if you listen back to the first episode of my podcast, it's abysmal. It's pretty bad. It's me going, hi, I'm Andrew, for like 20 minutes, not knowing how to do it and not knowing how to craft a show. But I knew that I could take the articles that I had written and turn them into a 30 or 40-minute voice thing, a voice clip, and then make that a show. And I had no idea what I was doing, and there was no other show that I could model mine after. So I just was like, all right, I'll try.
And it's been incredibly successful. Like I said in the intro, you've had lots of followers. You've been doing this for years and years. I'm wondering uh, if there are any kind of really interesting facts or really interesting outcomes you can tell us about from doing the show.
Just interacting with other people and people coming into my private messages and saying, you know what, I listened to your show and it made me feel not so alone. I am recording right now. Right now, it's, we're in the middle of COVID, and I'm recording a bunch of episodes specifically with disabled thought leaders around their experiences of disability in a pandemic. And the response I've gotten from the community has been not huge, but overwhelming, in that people will come to me and say, "Your show makes me feel like we can get through this pandemic together. These episodes make me feel not so alone. Thank you for that." Or people saying, I listened to your show and I learned something," or "I listened to your show and it turned me on and it made me realize that disabled people I can be attracted to them, and that's okay." And like, just giving people a chance to listen to my silly show, which I record from my bedroom. I have no studio. I have no producer. I have nobody. I have no sound person. It's literally me and my computer being like, here I am. So the fact that like outlets in Canada like CBC have interviewed me about it. Like I was in LA before COVID doing an award show where the podcast was awarded as one of the best LGBTQ podcasts of 2020. Like it
Wow.
floors me that that this little thing that I really truly didn't think would go past 10 episodes because I was like, nobody will listen to me. I'm silly, whatever. But the fact that it has gone so far and wide, and again, it's not hit the mark of like a huge podcast, but that's not why I do it. I do it because I know that the disabled community needs this right now, and they've always needed this. And if I can use my voice to do that, why wouldn't I?
Yeah, and I think in addition to the disability community needing it, like you've mentioned, you've had non-disabled people listen. You've had people in other communities listen who have also learned from your podcast, learned from the people you've spoken to, the insights that uh, you've given. And I think in some ways that's this is essentially another pedagogical tool, right? This is just another tool for learning and teaching and communicating, and I think you've done a really like kind of successful job of reframing disability and sexuality in ways for people.
Thank you.
So thank you for your contribution. Yeah. So I want to jump into segment 2, what I call the middle or the liminal space. This is when I get to talk about your academic crush, but since we're not in the world of academia, I wondered if you had like a work crush or a mentorship crush, someone who you just can't stop either reading or watching or consuming in some way, and that you kind of recommend all the time.
I'm trying to think of who I recommend all the just people like, and it's so funny. I was editing a podcast that I did with her recently. People like Emily Ladau is a disability activist out of New York. She is somebody that I really admire. People like Carson Tueller, who is out of the States and does stuff with and has done so with Andrew Yang's recent presidential campaign. Just I really admire people with disabilities doing stuff. And I can't think of anybody academically that does disability stuff that I'm really like into, because I find that when we write disability things in the academic space, and I've done it and I did it, so I know how dry it can be. It can be so fucking dry. It's so dry, and I've done it. I've written papers. My master's thesis was all about disability in the law, and oh my god, I was bored with myself. So that's why you asked earlier, kind of the origins of why I do what I do. That's why the minute I was done my MA, I was like, I want to do something creative. I want to take this knowledge that I have gleaned over the last, it took me like 10 years of school, a BA and an MA, and I want to turn it into something pop culture related. I'm a fame whore. I like attention. I like cameras. I like that kind of stuff. So I wanted to take what I learned and make it fun and make it accessible and make it something people could have access to. Where when we look at disability studies, unfortunately, even people in it don't have access to what a lot of the articles and a lot of the stuff, because it's so heavy.
Yeah. And of course, I'm part of the problem in some ways because I am, trying to secure a position in academia. But I think what a lot of us have learned, and I'm someone who is learning that as well, is that like, if you want people to connect with your work, you're going to have to talk to them using like plain language, like all the access things that we know, right?
Yeah.
You're going to have to talk to people through creative adventures. You're going to have to talk to people when they're on the subway, listening to your podcast as they go to work. Like that's
maybe not so much right now, but
yeah, not so much right now, of course. Yeah. It's a really important way, and I think more and more academia is coming to understand that like dissemination, how we get our work out there, needs to be accessible. It needs to be framed in ways that people can connect with more easily.
and it needs to be bite-sized. Like I don't want to spend 3 hours reading your dissertation thesis. Like I'm happy that you did it and good for you, but like I don't want to read that. I barely wanted to do mine when I did it. So, like,
Yeah.
it needs to be 20, 30 minutes in a podcast, 40 minutes in a podcast, or like a quick think piece that can get people like understanding what the issues are versus like, let's break down every theory. Because the trouble I have with disability studies, to go off on a bit of a tangent on you, the trouble I have with disability studies is it doesn't often translate to what's really happening in the disability in the real world. It's all very pretty and very theoretical.
Yeah, I
It,
mean, I think that, let's say, a criticism of lots of academic spaces, right, is that does it reflect really what's happening in the real world? And I think it's a legitimate criticism, of course. I always think it's important that we have people who are thinking, right?
of course, of
Really, really,
course.
really deeply. Like I like the people who've been sitting there and thinking about one idea for 20 years. I like that concept. I like that idea because I think they do have something to teach and to contribute.
Yeah,
In the same sense, I understand what you're saying, that that's great and all, but if we need things that are right now, right, that are reflecting our current world, the ones that, can help people in the immediate, sometimes academics are not there for that.
yeah, yeah. And that's where I struggle. And that's why everybody said, "Oh, Andrew, do disability studies." It's like, oh, nope, sorry. Like, I have lived experience. I'm gonna just kind of rely on that and hope that that gets me through.
Yeah. So, I want to know what advice you have for young people, whether it's young students or young disabled people, whether it's them trying to get out and, find a date, or whether it's to find a job. Is there some kind of nugget that you can share with them?
I'll distill it down really quick for you. It would be to be as disabled as you need to be in the moment. And what I
Okay.
mean by that is like, don't hide it. Don't pretend it isn't there. Don't like minimize it because we do it all the time because of internalized ableism. I'm 36 in 3 weeks and I still do it all the time with all the stuff that I know about disability, the disability politic. I still minimize my disability in certain spaces. So I would say be as disabled as you need to be in the moment, really, truly, because that it's okay. And whatever you're dealing with, whether it's a job, a date, a hookup, whatever it is, like your disability isn't going to go away. So you better start making friends with it.
I think that's wonderful advice. A really good nugget of information to pass along. So thank you. On to segment three. I call this outside the research, the project, the work, the art. I want to know who is the most famous person you've met and how did that experience come about?
I have a few.
Yes,
On
sure. I
on
knew you would.
I'll name my few because I guess I'm popular. Um, I guess so. I don't know. So professionally, the people that I've worked with people like Davey Wavy, who's a YouTuber. I've been asked to be on Dan Savage's podcast, who's like one of the top gay sex podcasters in the world. I have bumped into Dan Levy at Pride. I ran into Ben Mulrooney when I was on MTV's One Girl Five Gays. Like I've met my fair share of famous humans, um, just doing what I do, and it's never been like I've never just met them because like I was doing a thing. I was just bumped into them because I was doing whatever I was doing, and they were doing what they were doing, and then there it is. My favorite celebrity encounter that made my heart go pitter patter was this is gonna be really funny. I I used to watch Gilmore Girls a lot when I was in university,
Of
and
course.
I had a crush on Rory Gilmore's dad. And one day I was at this event to see my friend M. Griner, who's a well-known Canadian musician, play a show, and Rory Gilmore's dad walked into the bar, and I literally was like, "Oh God!" And he saw me like seeing him, and he walked over and he goes, "Do you know who I am?" And I was like, "Yeah, you're Rory Gilmore's dad." And he goes, "Yes, I am." And I was like, "Oh, I just wanted to say I love your work, man." Because I was trying to be all cool and like masculine. Because I didn't want to be like, "Oh my God, I have a giant crush on you." So I was trying to be all cool about it. And he was like, "Okay, just want to say hi." And then he like walked away, and I was like, "Okay, I'm happy now."
I love that story, and I'm so glad that you've outed yourself as a Gilmore Girls fan because I think that's
Such a fan.
Such a fan.
Anything that
Me as well.
Lauren Graham does, I'm like, I'll watch that. Sure, sure.
I'm there for it. Honestly,
Yeah,
anything that Lauren Graham's does
yeah,
is brilliant. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of the second like those four other episodes they did on Netflix. There's like some weird fat
yeah,
phobia
yeah.
there in like the second or third episode, but I still watched all of it because I love them so
I
much.
mean, the way that she's such a dork in real life. When you see her in interviews, you're like, how do you do that? Who are you? And also, why can't we be best friends? Like, I just like her a lot.
Okay, I love that. I love these stories. What is an obscure fact that you carry around with you? The one that you interject in when there's like a lull in the conversation.
Um, I'm an American.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
I was born in Laguna Beach, California.
Oh, wow.
And so I was born 3 months premature, and so my mom was going down there for the 1984 Olympics, and I decided, guess what? I'm coming out now. And that's something that I interject when, especially right now with we're talking about US politics. I interjected a lot because I would be like, if I lived down there, I'd vote for this person or I would vote for this person. I would not vote for for either the Democratic nominee right now or the Republican nominee. They're both trash, but but
I
that's
know
okay.
I know they have such a hard decision ahead of them now because Biden is the Democratic nominee,
Mm,
and like it's yeah, I mean both of the candidates. I mean, there's no equivalence between, Biden and Trump, but
no.
Biden is trash, of course, and
Yeah, Biden has his own huge problems
yeah.
with stuff.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, but so I want to know. So you were born 3 months, sorry, 3 months early or 3 weeks early, 3 weeks early,
3 months early, months.
3 months early. Okay,
Yeah.
and so your parents are Canadian then, or your mom is Canadian, and she then brought
She
you back over.
yeah, she went there on vacation and then had to stay with me in LA for 3 months while I was in the hospital growing. And then she was like, okay, I'm gonna bring Andrew over, and I was raised Canadian, so I was raised with the snow. I was raised with all the trappings of being a true Canadian. I've been raised with, but I like to throw people off and be like, I'm American, like yeah,
Yeah, and like specifically from Laguna, which is like so in particular gets an image of like, you know, what is it like sun-kissed,
palm trees and like
skin.
yeah,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
like for me, when the OC that show used to be popular, I would always joke and be like, I'm from there. That's where I was born. It's supposed to be about me.
That's great. So, do you have a hobby? Is there something that you do that isn't work centered, that takes up some of your leisure time, and how did you get started?
A hobby is listening to true crime podcasts a hobby because
Sure.
I like that. I like that. I like true crime stuff a lot. I don't know why. I'm really into it. Like I can sit and watch a Dateline marathon for the whole day. Like no problem.
Is there a particular kind of true crime? Because there's a lot of them out there now. Was there one that's really like piqued your interest?
There's one that that I was actually that I guessed it on. I guessed it on their show a few months, a year ago now. Um, it's called Wine and Crime, and it's these three friends out of Minnesota who just make a show about crime, and they get drunk while they do it, and it's really funny. And they're friends of mine now, and so like we did a show, and they came on my show and asked me questions about disability, and it was a really cool thing. And we did a whole I did a whole show on their show about ableist crimes, and it was really that was cool. That was really cool. Um,
That sounds cool. I should go listen to that. That sounds awesome.
I can't remember what episode it was, but it was we had so much fun, and they're a huge podcast. They're like touring and doing all the stuff that I like would dream to do. I.e., if anyone's listening in academia and wants to help me like start a tour, let me know. But they tour and they do all this stuff, and so when they said yes to having me on their show, because I was just a listener, I was a fan, and I just emailed them one day and I said, "Oh my God, I love what you're doing. Can we chat some more?" So we started talking, and then I said, "I also have a show. could I maybe be on yours, and I could do ableist crimes for you, and you could talk to me about sex and disability on mine. And so we kind of came to this agreement. And we all the four of us did it together, and it was just really fun. And it was just nice to to be able to talk about true crime, which is something I'm weirdly fascinated with people who like do it for a living.
Right, and then still bring like disability and all the things that you love about that with it as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Is there something that you're reading right now, like a really good book that you could recommend?
It's something I'm reading. You know, as I get older, my attention span is less and less. So reading is, I used to love to read as a kid, and I haven't been able to pick it up as an adult. It's weird, but I think the last thing I read, I've been listening to audiobooks. And an audiobook that I have been listening to is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Okay, you're going Narnia.
I'm also a big fantasy nerd. I love things like Stranger Things and things like Narnia and things like, anything magic. I'm like, sure, yep, great. Like Harry Potter is my jam. But Narnia was something that I loved as a kid until as an adult, someone told me that it was a religious allegory for God. And I was like, well, you ruined it now. I can't. But as a child, not knowing that, it was my favorite story.
That's great. I mean, I've never picked up Narnia. Of course, I've seen the movies, because I feel like it was part of growing up, in the aughts.
Really? You've never picked up Narnia? I highly recommend.
Yeah, I should pick it up. Yeah. Okay, and the final question, the question that we're all here to kind of answer, is how do you think disability can save the world?
That's so loaded. Such a loaded question. How do I think disability can save the world? If we start listening to disabled people, really listen to them and let them lead and let them create and let them be a part of the conversation and not an afterthought. Let them be the first part of the conversation. Put disabled people first. That's how disability can save the world. Look at what's happening right now with COVID. If we had a disabled leader right now, do you think that any disabled people will be worried about dying? Probably not. Yeah. Nobody would be worried about dying because disabled people know how to stockpile and know how to plan and know how to do all these things that I feel all of our governments are failing on quite disastrously, if I'm honest. So we need to put disabled people in leadership roles everywhere.
That's wonderful. Thanks so much, Andrew, for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. People want to follow me, they can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at It's Andrew Gurza. That's ITSANDREWGURZA on Twitter and Instagram. You can download my pod it's expanding. You can download my pod because there'll be a bunch more coming. Disability After Dark, wherever you podcast. You can book me for digital talks at andrewgurza.com. And that's me.
That's great. And all of that information will also be in the notes below. Thank you again, Andrew. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right.
Thanks again to Andrew for coming on the show. It was great to have another podcaster. Over the next few weeks, we'll be joined again by other disability and mad studies scholars, activists, and artists, so stay tuned. I'll also remind folks that this podcast is now accessible to deaf and hard of hearing folks through the website fadyshinuda.com. There are both videos available, but also transcribed copies of the interviews. Get in touch by sending me an email at disabilitysavestheworld@gmail.com. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by me, Fady Shinuda. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Disability Saves the World.